you turn to the writing and language portion of your test, I believe that will be on page 316 of the Big Blue Book. Yes, that's correct, 316. So are you ready? We're going to dive in to our final writing and language passage together. Hopefully you've picked up some of the tips and tricks, the things to look out for. So rather than waste your time going over those, I'm just going to dive right in, okay? How a cat in a hat changed children's education. I probably have a pretty good idea of which cat in a hat we're talking about. It's probably the cat in the hat, but we'll see. In a 1954 Life magazine article, author John Hersey expressed concern that children in the United States were disengaged from learning how to read. Among other problems, Hersey noted, the reading material available to grade schoolers had a hard time competing with television, radio, and other media for children's attention. Okay, so what are we being asked about here? Well, this is sort of a concision question, right? We're being asked, does this make things more clear? Hard time competing with, yeah, we don't need to say and with because we already say with over here. We can just say with these three things, television, radio, and other media. No change is necessary there. One solution he proposed was to make children's books more interesting, since an individual's sense of wholeness follows and cannot precede a sense of accomplishment. Okay, that seems kind of out of nowhere. Let's see. The writer wants to include a quotation by Hersey that supports the topic of the passage. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? Well, we don't really know the topic of the passage yet, right? So I'm going to flag this. We're going to come back to it. Boom. The story of the Cat in the Hat's publication began when William Spalding, the director of the education division at the publishing company Houghton Mifflin, read Hersey's article and had an idea. Okay, so we're being asked about this section right here. That's all we're allowed to change. And if we look at what's being offered here, we have Spalding the director, Spalding, comma, the director, comma, Spalding, hyphen, the director. Well, the thing that happens here is we're giving Spalding's title, right? He's the director of the education division at the publishing company Houghton Mifflin. So that's an aside. Hopefully, I'll bring up the whiteboard here. Hopefully you remember that if we're giving an aside, right? Like let's just show that with like 3 dots. These are just things I want to say to insert into the sentence. I can put that aside in a couple different ways. I can break from the sentence by putting something in parentheses. Another way I could do it is putting the aside surrounded by hyphens. A dash here and a dash there. It just takes you out of the sentence for a minute and then gets you right back in. Or I can do an aside using commas. I know they look like little lowercase g's. Now, the thing is, whatever I use for an aside, these two have to match. I can't ever use like a hyphen on one side and a parenthesis on the other. Or the same way I can't use a comma here and a dash here. It's just not going to work. We always have to balance the scales, so to speak. So how does this aside end? It ends with a comma. So we better start it with a comma, which is how we have it already. So what's the answer here? No change necessary. Spalding agreed that there was a need for appealing books for beginning readers, period. He thought he knew who should write one. Okay, we're being asked about this section. Which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion? Okay, so we're trying to combine these two sentences. So let's plug and play. Spalding agreed that there was a need for appealing books for beginning readers, comma, and he thought he knew who should write one. Well, that works pretty well, and it's pretty short. Beginning, all these basically say the same thing, but with more words. Hyphen, namely, comma, he, like that's completely unnecessary. Readers, semicolon, and Spalding. Well, we know that can't be true because a semicolon serves the same purpose as a period. And you never start a sentence with and. So if you never follow a period with the word and, you would never follow a semicolon with the word and. Readers, comma, and meanwhile he, well, no, we really just need these words. Readers, and he knew who should write one. Use as few words as possible. He arranged to have dinner with Theodore Geisel, who wrote and illustrated children's books under the name Dr. Seuss, and issued him a challenge: write me a story that first graders can't put down. Having known Spalding for many years and having maintained a professional relationship with him, Geisel was an experienced writer and illustrator. So which choice best supports the information that follows in the sentence? Well, Geisel was an experienced writer and illustrator is what follows. So this should lead up to this. Now, the issue here, I don't think that knowing Spalding makes Geisel an experienced writer and illustrator. So that's a no for me. Having acquired a reputation for perfectionism and for setting high standards for his work, I guess that's closer, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with his experience. Let's keep reading. Having been interested in politics before breaking into the genre of children's literature. Okay, interesting, but not having to do with his experience. Actually, it's the exact opposite. D, having published 9 children's books and having received 3 nominations for the prestigious Caldecott Medal. Yep, that's the one. This one shows that like his work was good. This one, or at least that he had high standards for his own work. This one shows that he's actually been at it for a while. So D is our way to go right here. However, this new project presented him with an obstacle. Now, what are we being given here? We're being given an option between different transition statements. So, however, this new project presented him with an obstacle. Okay, so the statement before is he has experience, and the statement afterwards is that this project is challenging him. So, it seems like this should be a contrasting transition, right? For example, is more of a continuing transition. That's not going to work for us. Furthermore, that's even more continuing. At any rate, well, that sort of continues in a way that doesn't have to do with whatever came before. You know what I mean? It's like a transition into literally any other topic. But we want a way to contrast his experience and the challenge ahead. So however is the one we want to go with. What was this challenge? Spalding told Geisel to write his entire book using a restricted vocabulary from an elementary school list of 348 words. Geisel started 2 stories, only to abandon them when he found that he needed to use words that were not on the list. On the verge of giving up, Geisel finally hit upon an image that became its basis, a cat wearing a battered stovepipe hat. Okay, well that's an interesting phrase here. Geisel finally hit upon an image that became its basis. And we're being given alternatives to that phrase. I'm a little confused here, that became its basis. There's no reference to what it is. So I don't like A, just because it's unclear. On the verge of giving up, an image that Geisel finally hit upon became the basis of his story. Well, this sounds like the image was on the verge of giving up, right? This is the image. And this is the person who is on the verge of giving up. So let's make sure we don't get those confused. All right, now we're getting a little bit better. On the verge of giving up, Geisel finally hit upon the image that became the basis for his story, a cat wearing a battered stovepipe hat. Yeah, that's the most clear one so far to me. Let's look at D. On the verge of giving up, the story was finally based on an image that Geisel hit upon. Well, again, no, that makes it sound like the story is on the verge of giving up, not Geisel. His main character established, Geisel commenced the difficult task of writing a book with a limited vocabulary. At the end of a duration 9 months long, The Cat in the Hat was complete. Well, let's see if there's a better way to say that phrase, at the end of a duration 9 months long. After 36 weeks, or 9 months, had passed. Does that seem necessary? After a length of 9 months had elapsed. Well, I guess it's a little more direct. How about D, 9 months later? 9 months later, The Cat in the Hat was complete. That's all we need. We don't need at the end of a duration 9 months long. Don't use $10 words when nickel ones will do. The book was a hit. Children were entertained by its plot about the antics of a mischievous cat, and is captivated by its eye-catching illustrations and memorable rhymes and rhythms. Rhythms and rhymes. I can read. So number 9 is about the word is, and we're being asked, well, does this connect with the subject? Well, this children were is plural and in the past tense. And we're being given singular in the present tense. So I don't like A. B, children were and was. No, that doesn't work. Children were and has been captivated. That just sounds really awkward. How about we just delete it? Right? Because we've already said were, so why do we need a verb again? Children were entertained by its plot about the antics of a mischievous cat and captivated by its eye-catching illustrations and memorable rhythms and rhymes. Yeah. That's the most concise answer we have. Just delete the word altogether. Its sales inspired another publishing company, Random House, to establish a series for early readers called Beginner Books, which featured works by Geisel and other writers, and other publishers quickly followed suit. In the years that followed, period, many talented writers and illustrators of children's books imitated Geisel's formula of restricted vocabulary and whimsical artwork. Okay, so in the years that followed, that's not a full sentence. what can we find here? Well, again, if the semicolon serves the same purpose as a period, we shouldn't use a semicolon if we wouldn't use a period. In the years that followed, comma, many talented writers and illustrators. That seems to work much more. In the years that followed, hyphen. Well, no, that would only work if we were starting an aside, but this is an introductory phrase, which the SAT loves, by the way. They love to say things like 9 years later, comma, or the afternoon of my mother's birthday, comma, that kind of thing. They like to drop you in with sort of a time-based placement. But perhaps, starting here, but perhaps the best proof of the Cat in the Hat's success is not its influence on other books, but its limited vocabulary and appealing word choices. The writer wants a conclusion, says number 11, that restates the main themes of the passage. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? Well, what was the main theme of the passage? If we sort of look over it again, and we will have to come back to number 2 once we figure this out as well. So it starts with this need in America in 1954 for books, improving children's literacy. Then Hersey hears this, or rather Spalding hears Hersey's statement, hires Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss writes this book. It's a huge hit. Now, so what's the proof of the Cat in the Hat success? It's not its influence on other books, but it's what? Its limited vocabulary? I don't think that's really proof of its success. I can write a book with limited vocabulary and it would not be good. Its impressive worldwide sales that continue to remain high to this day. Well, okay, I don't know. Did we talk about sales previously? I think we did. So that's the origin. Then when we move into the success, yeah, the book was a hit. Well, I don't know about that. Maybe. The enduring ability to delight children and engage them in learning how to read. Okay, seems a lot more on brand with what we've read already. D, the important role in the history of illustration in the 20th century. What? We haven't talked about that at all. So I don't like D. B is also a little just off. C is the best one for sure. Because it was this need for literacy that started our issue in the first place. Let's look at number 2. So now that we have a better idea of the topic of the passage, the main theme, right? Let's see which would fit best in here. One solution he proposed was to make children's books more interesting, since an individual sense of wholeness follows and cannot precede a sense of accomplishment. I don't think that really has to do with anything, like an individual's sense of accomplishment doesn't have to do with the Cat in the Hat. Make children's books more interesting since learning starts with failure. The first failure is the beginning of education. Now that may be true, but that's not in the passage. Interesting because journalism allows its readers to witness history. Fiction gives its readers an opportunity to live it. Okay, again, an interesting take, but I don't think that journalism is a big contending genre of literature for young children. So I don't really like C. Interesting with drawings like those of the wonderfully imaginative geniuses among children's illustrators. Yes, that is what we end up talking about in the very next paragraph. Theodore Geisel has all this experience, right? Oh, I guess that's in the paragraph afterwards. Okay. And that brings us through that passage. For our last one, let's zip through this this one passage here. Keep student volunteering voluntary. So again, as with all the writing and language passages, we're just gonna dive right in, read it, and answer as we go. So a growing number of public schools in the United States require students to complete community service hours to graduate. Such volunteering, be it helping at a local animal shelter, when they pick up litter, or working at a healthcare facility, has obvious benefits for the community it serves and teaches students important life skills. Okay, so we're being given, this is all about litter, picking it up, but there's just different ways of phrasing it. So how do we know which way we should phrase it? Well, since we're in a list of 3, we have to look at the verbs being used around it. Volunteering, working. So we have both participles surrounding it. So in the middle, really we should be saying picking up litter. Option D. Boom. But critics say that making volunteerism compulsory misses the point of the act. So hopefully you know compulsory just means required. By its very definition, volunteer work is done willingly. Okay, so number 13 says that the writer wants a transition from the previous paragraph that highlights the criticism of compulsory volunteering, which we've already defined, mentioned in the previous paragraph. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? Well, yeah, we know if you know what it means to be a volunteer, it means that you've given up your time for free, but also of your own free will. So to transition from compulsory to willingly, it seems that defining the term volunteer would actually be a very helpful way to make the case. So I'm going to put no change there. By requiring students to do community service in order to graduate, school officials, apostrophe, are taking away students, apostrophe, choice to give up their time for nonprofit activities, making volunteerism less meaningful and pleasurable. So the only reason to use an apostrophe, as you hopefully know, would be for a possessive use. There's something belonging to the officials or the students, or a contracting use. So like official is or student is contracted into officials or students. However, these seem to both be plural, and one is possessive and the other one is not. Students have something. The students here have a choice. What do officials have? Not anything in this sentence. Officials are. They have a verb. So we need an apostrophe in students and not with officials. That leads us to option D. According to a psychological concept called the Reactants Theory, and if you don't know what that is, I mean, I wouldn't worry about it because they're about to define it. The loss of freedom in choosing an activity can cause a negative reaction. For instance, instead of focusing on the good they are doing, students may become resentful of the demands that compulsory volunteering places on their schedules. Okay, so we've defined it pretty well there. Proponents of compulsory volunteering, who are in favor of it, point out that it allows young people to garner the benefits that volunteering offers. Okay, now we're being offered some different options to replace in here. It's all a matter of phrasing, right? And a couple different changes in like commas. But here's the thing, proponent means you're in favor of it. So if we say you're in favor of it over there, we don't need to say it again over here. Proponents of compulsory volunteering point out this. Yeah, that's all we need. Students who volunteer report increased self-esteem, better relationship building skills, and increasingly busy schedules. All right, that may be true, but let's see. Which choice provides a supporting example that is most similar to the examples already in the sentence? Well, everything being given in the sentence is positive examples, right? Increased self-esteem, better relationship building skills, and increasingly busy schedules. Probably not what we're looking for. A closer connection with their community? That sounds good. Less time spent engaging in social activities? No, that sounds like a negative thing. We want students to have social lives, ideally. D, little increase in academic achievement. Again, no, not really a positive point. B is what we want to go with. Some studies have also found that students who do community service are more likely to volunteer as adults and thus affect society positively over the course of many years. Now, this is a diction question. About effect versus affect. Hopefully you remember this, but I like to use the term raven. So remember, affect is a verb, and effect is a noun. There are rare cases where this is not true, but the good news is that those cases will not be on the SAT. If you remember raven, then you can remember whether to use effect or affect, as the case may be. Another way to remember it, it's just a little more succinct. You can choose whatever you like, though. Oof, what is my handwriting doing? Try it again there. If that's a little easier for you, just remember affect, action word. You affect something, but you have a cause and an effect, because effect is a noun. So what do we have here? We have students changing society. That's clearly an action word, right? So they should be affecting society. But we have two different forms of of affect here. So we can cross out no change, we can cross out effecting. But which one actually agrees with the noun that we've set up? What brings us the best subject-verb agreement? So some studies have found that students who do these things are more likely to affect society. So students affect, not students affects. However, most research looks at students who volunteer in general, not making a distinction between students who are required to volunteer by their schools and those who volunteer willingly. One recent study by Sarah E. Helms, assistant professor of economics at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, did focus specifically on mandatory volunteering. So what does mandatory mean? It means the same thing as compulsory. It means you have to do it. But we're being given a couple different options. There's a coercive, forcible, or imperative. Well, coercive is a little more threatening. Same with forcible. Like, these students aren't being threatened with violence to volunteer. They're just being required to volunteer. And imperative is also just a little more forceful. That's more of like a command, commanding volunteering. So I wouldn't go with D. I think that A, no change, mandatory, is still our best option. She found that students who were required to volunteer rushed to complete their service hours in early high school. They then did significantly less volunteer work in the 12th grade than the service hours of those not required to volunteer. Okay, let's see what we're being asked about here. Okay, the words are all the same. It's just a matter of punctuation. Now, this is a complete thought, an independent clause. This is also a complete thought. And hopefully you remember that an independent clause can only be separated by a few things. So if we have two independent clauses, right? A complete sentence and a complete sentence. I see for independent clause. They can be separated by a period or any sort of ending punctuation. So like a question mark or an exclamation point. Those work too, but mostly it's going to be a period for your ending punctuation. They can be separated by a semicolon, which you remember is just the period's pretentious cousin. It does the exact same job, it's just a little more snooty about it. Or these two independent clauses can be separated by a comma and a fanboys conjunction. And those fanboys are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So, if we don't have one of these three things, very occasionally, I will also mention, very occasionally they'll be separated by a colon. But that's only if, as in all cases with a colon, that's only if the independent clause that comes after the colon expands on what comes before the colon. Okay? You might get one of these in a test. But largely, you're going to want to focus on ending punctuation semicolons, comma, fanboys. Now, if we don't have one of these three things, then we either have to change the punctuation or we have to change the independent clause. So again, two independent clauses, but they're only separated by a comma here. That's an issue. Right away, we have an option to separate them with a semicolon. Semicolon, in early high school, they then, comma, did significantly less. Well, I don't think we need to do that, no. We don't need another comma. And we don't need a comma here either, even though that period and that semicolon are a lot better. Let's go with the other semicolon. It just drops us right into the sentence. Okay, we're not going to finish this passage in our time, but let's do one more question. Let's finish this sentence here. So they then did significantly less regular volunteer work in the 12th grade than the service hours of those not required to volunteer. Now, these options might seem to not make sense, right? Then did students who were, then hours worked by students compared with students. Here's the thing though. We need to remember what we're actually comparing here. They, meaning the students, did less work than students not required to volunteer. But this makes it sound like they did less work than the hours did. That's a problem of clarity because the hours didn't do any work. The students did work and they did less work than these other students. So I don't like A, and C also seems to be comparing students with hours. These students worked less than the hours worked by other, yeah, no, that just doesn't work. Now, then did students who were, that makes sense grammatically, right? There is some better subject-verb agreement there. But can we say the same thing with fewer words here? They did significantly less volunteer work in the 12th grade compared with students not required to volunteer. That's the one we want to go with. Okay, well, I hope all of that made sense. It's been a pleasure going through these tests with you guys.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and please remember to contact us at info@embracetutoring.com to set up any personalized private tutoring sessions you would like. Stay tuned for future videos, and best of luck with your studies. We definitely encourage you to visit our Instagram as well as TikTok pages if you have any questions along the way. Take care, guys. Best of luck with your studies.